All right, Toglife back with another video, and in this one I have ZHIYUN's new mini gimbal, the Weebil 3E. Now, disclosure, because you know YouTube likes us to say this, they did send this to me for free to test out. I do get to keep it, but of course I get to say whatever I want to say. And if you are a regular watcher of my videos, you know I say whatever I want to say. And if you're new to the channel, as you watch this video, you're definitely going to know that I want to say whatever I want to say about it, and I'm not going to amp it up if I don't think that that's warranted. So in this video, I first want to talk about the cons of this, because I do want to get them out the way, because I do like the gimbal. I like the way the gimbal functions. I like using the gimbal. I actually have a DJI gimbal. I have an RS3 Mini, which was the reason why I allowed them to send it to me, because this is very similar to the RS3 Mini. So it would give me an opportunity to really compare the two. I love using the gimbal, but there are some cons that I definitely want to talk about, and I want to get them out the way, so then that way we can get to the good stuff. So I want to talk about the cons, and then I'm going to talk about the things that I really like about the gimbal. And then towards the end of the video, I'm going to talk to someone that's never used the gimbal before to get their feedback on what they feel about this gimbal. So with that being said, don't want to waste any time. Let's jump right into it. Now, the first thing, and honestly, I'm very disappointed that this is even a thing, because in 2024, this shouldn't be a thing. This would not increase the cost of the gimbal whatsoever. But the first thing I don't like is that on the base plate, the screw doesn't have a D-ring. So you either have to use a flathead or an Allen wrench to be able to tighten the screw into your camera. And I just think in 2024, that shouldn't be a thing. Like, I don't want to have to carry around a screwdriver or an Allen wrench. I'm going to lose them both. Even me being as organized as I am, I'm going to lose them both, and it's just not necessary. They could have just put a D-ring on it. ZHIYUN, I'm not sure why you don't have that. In my opinion, there's no excuse for that. It just makes it more difficult than it really needs to be. And when you're out in the field, the last thing you want to have to do if you got to make adjustments. And when I talk about the next thing that I don't like, it's going to make it even more of a cumbersome problem. But when you're out in the field, you shouldn't have to worry about having a coin or a screwdriver or an Allen wrench just to be able to take this base plate off or make adjustments to it. So that's a minor thing. That certainly isn't going to be something that's going to stop you from getting the gimbal. You can replace that easy. It's just something you shouldn't have to worry about in 2024. So the second thing, and speaking of the base plate, I don't like the design of the base plate, and the fact that this base plate, and let me take this off so you can see. I probably would have put some B-roll in already, but let me take this off so you can see. I don't like how big this base plate is. Now, on this particular gimbal, this base plate is how you make the adjustments for one of the axes, right? Whereas on my DJI, it's a very small base plate, and the adjustment is built into the gimbal arm itself. The problem with this base plate is that because it's so long, when you attach it to the bottom of your camera, if you have a lens that is bigger than the camera itself, so if the lens extends down below the camera, you can't do it with this base plate. There's really no way to work around it. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, just push the base plate back so it doesn't impede. And that sounds good. But remember what I said, this is how you do the balance. So if you have this too far back, your camera is often going to be too front heavy, and then you don't have any play to be able to adjust it. Now, I know that these smaller gimbals are more designed for smaller cameras. Totally get that. But I just don't like the design of that, because now I'm limited. Not only am I limited in the lenses that I can use, but I'm also limited in filters. Like a lot of you guys, I have 77mm filters. You get the biggest size that you need for the lens that you have, and then you get step-up rings to use on your smaller diameter lenses. I cannot use my 77 filters with this because they extend just a hair below where this can fit. So when I'm using this gimbal, I can't use filters. I can't use any lens that is bigger than what the camera bottom will allow. Now, it's not the end of the world, because usually when I do gimbals, I'm using my pancake lens, but the design of this, I don't like. And because I have the DJI gimbal and it's got a design that works where I don't have that problem, it makes it a problem with this particular gimbal. Of course, you can work around that. You can get risers. There's always workarounds. So that's fine. But when you buy a product, do you really want to have to do workarounds all the time? Not so much, right? So that is number 2. Number 3, the third thing that I don't love is where they've placed the trigger. So you have your scroll wheel right here, and that feels very comfortable. When you're holding the gimbal, it's right where you would think that it should be. Very nice. The problem with the trigger is that in the design of this, they have this little lip that feels very good on your index finger when you're doing the scroll wheel. But in order to hit the trigger, you really have to bring that finger way off the gimbal to be able to get up there to hit the trigger. And it's just, it doesn't feel natural at all. Now, this is a small thing, okay? And a lot of times with these types of products, it is small things. Again, these aren't necessarily going to be things that may preclude you from buying the gimbal. But when you're using this for hours at a time, it does become a problem. This finger definitely starts to hurt. It comes all the way down into your wrist when you're having to constantly strain that index finger up here to hit that trigger. It would have been nice if they wouldn't have had so much of a lip, because really at the end of the day, you really don't even need that lip there. When you're holding the gimbal, most of the weight is going to be right here. That lip really isn't necessary. It's not really helping to take anything off of the finger. There's really no strain on the finger just in how you're holding it already. So that really isn't necessary. So it would be nice for them to shave this down a little bit so that finger would just travel in a much more comfortable position. Again, minor thing, but want to mention that. And then the last thing, and I'm a little hesitant to even bring this up, because one thing that I don't like when people do reviews of videos is that they indicate cons or negatives when it's just kind of the design of what you have. Now, I know everything that I've talked about has been in the design, and I just want to point these things out because if you use gimbals, if you have other gimbals, these things can be a problem for you. So I did want to bring light to it, but I don't like necessarily highlighting things that are just the design and that you would know ahead of time. This one is going to be one of those things that you would know ahead of time. The other stuff you kind of wouldn't know until you got it and you put it in your hand. The menu system on this gimbal, and I think the menu system on most ZHIYUN gimbals is very, very, very outdated. If you use DJI gimbals, you will be extremely spoiled by how nice their menu system is. First of all, their touchscreen. This is not touchscreen. Their color, they're very vibrant, they're very intuitive. This menu system is not that. It's not touchscreen, it's not color, it's not vibrant. It honestly is not intuitive. So the menu system on this one is going to take some getting used to. If you're using ZHIYUN gimbals already, you would be used to it. It is very similar to the menu systems on most of their gimbals that have come out recently. But if you're coming from a DJI or if you've not used a gimbal before, the menu system on this does not feel like 2024. And this gimbal just came out a month ago. So the menu system is a bit difficult to navigate. But in that negative, the positive is that this gimbal has a ton of customization, more so than my DJI gimbal. My DJI gimbal gives me quite a bit to be able to adjust things. This gimbal takes that to the next level. It's almost too much customization because you really can fine tune everything to a granular level. And that's good if you need it. It's a bit much if you're just kind of getting into this ecosystem. It can be a bit much. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. You kind of can know what the menu system is before you buy this gimbal. So I definitely don't want to make it seem like it's a big negative, but I do want to point out that the menu system is a bit archaic for 2024. So those are really my cons. As you can see, they're really more cosmetic. They do tap into the function of the gimbal a little bit just in terms of how you set it up. But I don't really feel like any of them would necessarily make me not buy this gimbal if I had the opportunity to use it and I had to decide if I wanted to buy it or not, because I love the function of it, which I'm going to get into next. Those things wouldn't stop me from buying it. So with that said, now we're going to head outside so I could talk about why I love this gimbal. So let's go. Now, if this gimbal was like a car, everything that I just mentioned in the video are really more cosmetic things. They don't really impact the performance of the car, but they may impact your decision on whether or not you want to drive the car. But what I do really like about this gimbal is the function of the gimbal. Now, One thing that I like about this one over my DJI is that I really don't have to balance this all that well. And I don't know exactly what the payload is because ZHIYUN does not give a pound payload. They kind of give a camera setup, and I couldn't find it before I did this video. So I'll put it somewhere on the screen and try to calculate what the pound is. So this might have a bigger payload than my DJI gimbal, but what I've really noticed is that I can just kind of be very loose in how I balance this, and it just still works very well. And for me, I also really like the customization of how I can have this move with me so that I can tweak it to be exactly how I want it to be. So when it comes to the function of this gimbal, once you get past those things that I already talked about, this is an extremely solid gimbal. And for the size of it, the payload is really good. It's really good. So at the end of the day, obviously things like the base plate and, you know, the trigger position and how you're having to use it, obviously that has an impact on you using the gimbal. But what's really important is, does the gimbal function as a gimbal? Does it work well? Does it keep the footage steady? Is it easy to use? Does it feel good in the hand? Those things, in my opinion, are more important than some of those cosmetic type things. And I can definitely say that this gimbal is a joy to use. Believe it or not, now I've had my DJI RS3 Mini for maybe a year, and I've used that quite a bit. I tend to reach for this one now over the DJI. They're both equally as good. They're both equally as good. But this one, it works well, and I like the movement of it. As I turn it, it's just smooth. It just works out well for me. So with that being said, now I want to really show you, kind of just put into practice to show you what this can do and give you some sample footage of just how smooth this is. So you can see right now, as I turn, the delay that I have with it, and all of those things are customizable, which is really nice. And so it functions as a gimbal. There's really nothing special about this gimbal over any other gimbal. It is a gimbal. Feels good in the hand. You know, obviously I have the tripod on there just to give me something more to hold. One thing I do want to mention real quick that I do like about the design of this over the DJI is the joystick position. Now, interestingly, when I first got this gimbal and I took it out, I actually did not like where this joystick was placed because I thought that it was too far to the left. This is where actually using something will highlight whether something really is a problem or not. So originally I thought that I wanted it to be more in line with where the screen was, because that in my mind felt more natural. But as I've used this gimbal, I've really found that the joystick position on this is in a great spot, because when you're holding the gimbal, your thumb is right here. So if the joystick was here, I would essentially run into the same problem that I really have with the trigger here, where I feel like I have to really bring that finger up a lot. You would run into the same problem here. You'd have to be bringing this thumb back like this to hit the joystick. So this is just kind of a natural position. My thumb is already right there, so I can just very easily raise that up and use that joystick to put that exactly where I need to be. So I do like their joystick position, and I didn't think that I would like it. So it is important to use these before you formulate your opinion on whether or not it's going to work or not. So with that being said, now let me give you some sample footage of me actually using the gimbal so you can kind of see what it can do. All right, turn around and run. Yeah, run around. Oh. Yep. You're walking. You gotta run. That's pretty good. Okay, Anthony's tired. Okay, so now let's see, where do we want to have you go? Where do you want to go? I'm just trying to show him what the gimbal can do. Because you're short, I'm having to stay down here. This is working my quads out. Very nice. All right, come run this way. Yep. Okay, so as you can see, I did my best to keep up with the kids that have all this energy and I don't. And in that footage, you can see that this gimbal did very well at keeping the footage steady. I wasn't even as ninja walky as I normally would be if I wasn't running around a backyard. So that really is a testament to how well this gimbal works. And I mean, I'm not trying to say that this gimbal is infinitely better than any other gimbal. I mean, gimbals do what gimbals do. But because I don't really have to focus too much on balancing it and it just works very well, that's just very enjoyable for me to use. So now I want to talk to Joe here. Now, Joe has never used the gimbal. Well, he has used the gimbal once, but before he used it just recently, he had never used the gimbal, didn't even know what a gimbal was. So I want to talk to him about his thoughts on using the gimbal, holding the gimbal, and the function of the gimbal, just to get the input of someone that isn't familiar with using gimbals. So, Joe, first, let's talk about you're holding a gimbal. How does that feel? You know, what are your thoughts on this particular gimbal in general?
Well, my first impressions of the unit is that it's heavy,
okay,
right? And I'm sure that that's a combination between the gimbal itself and the camera. So that I would say is the first thing. The second thing, because it's so heavy, I feel compelled to hold it on even tighter because of the value of the equipment. You don't want to damage or break something. But for me, I felt like holding it down here, you know, while there's grip at this bottom part, I feel like it's not as ergonomically designed for somebody to confidently know that you have it here on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, with that said, also I'm left-handed, but I feel the most secure holding this with my right hand. Okay. And that kind of came into conflict with many of the controls because I found myself going from one stance to another to be able to either follow or film appropriately.
Okay. So with that being said, one thing I do want to touch on is that this gimbal does have an optional handle that you can get. Now, ZHIYUN did not have any handles to send to me before I made this video, so unfortunately I don't have one to use in this video. But having the side handle that you can attach to the gimbal will definitely make holding the gimbal easier, especially if you have to film for a long time. On my DJI gimbal, I definitely use the side handle a lot. So on this one, this gimbal is a little bit heavier than other gimbals that I've used in this class, and especially depending upon the setup that you put on it, it definitely can get heavy over time. So getting that optional side handle would definitely mitigate a lot of the things that he just talked about. So you talked about the design of it. Now let's talk about using the gimbal. How was that for you?
I felt like it was intuitive. I could tell obviously the purpose of the device and of the product. You know, the one thing that I would tell you is that I felt like in gesturing when moving either to the right or moving to the left, while the motors were responsive, I felt like they were just a tad bit behind. So almost like a half step or half second behind where I needed it to be when I needed it to be there.
Mm-hmm. So in him talking about that goes into what I talked about at the beginning of this video, the customization that this gimbal has. Now for me, I have this set up to move the way that I needed to move based off of how I use the gimbal. For him, it doesn't work. And that's where the customization really comes into play. If we weren't able to adjust that, it could not work for both of us, and then the gimbal really wouldn't be useful. So although I touched on the menu system being a little bit too much and there being too many adjustments, it really comes into play here where you can really fine tune it to be exactly how you need it to be. So you know what that response is going to be. So when you're in the field, it's going to do exactly what you want it to do. And if you need it to do something different, you can easily make that adjustment. So in terms of like using the gimbal, was there anything else that worked for you, that didn't work for you, or any final thoughts on the use of the gimbal?
No, I think that I see the purpose and value of having a device like this. Even as a novice, wanting a clean and consistent shot amongst shooting either something that interests you or your family, I would totally have something like this in my collection of camera accessories.
Cool. So if you are like Joe here and you would like to pick up this gimbal, there will be a link in the description of this video. And if you use that link, you can get 10% off of this gimbal. I'm actually not sure off the top of my head what the price is, so I will put that on the screen somewhere. And And yeah, so hopefully this video was helpful. If you have any questions on this particular gimbal, feel free to drop those down in the comments below, and I will definitely answer those questions. So my final thoughts is, in function, it's a great gimbal. In design, there are some things that I would love to see ZHIYUN improve on in the next iteration, but really none of those things are, in my opinion, enough to tell you not to get the gimbal, but that is something that you have to decide. Now, one last thing I should have already touched on, but I just now thought about it. You can easily set this up to be in vertical orientation. It is very easy to go from this portrait or this landscape orientation into the portrait or vertical orientation. And I do like the design of this. It is very, very, very easy to make that change. And I think that's very important when using a gimbal, because a lot of other gimbals, although they allow for vertical shooting, you have to either remove a piece of the system, or you have to do something different, put an L bracket on your camera. You have to do something to get it. This is very intuitive. You literally can just slide the plate off, turn it, slide it on, and it works. So like I said, I'll put some B-roll in, just wanted to touch on that. So yeah, that's that.